I think that people can be a company's biggest assets. They really are the ones that can deliver on those strategies. And it's like, how do you create environments where people feel empowered, where people like their jobs, where they want to show up every day and just like give it their all?
Welcome to Kindred Spirits, the podcast that brings you unfiltered conversations about life, work, and everything in between.
Join us as we share stories, spark connections, and celebrate the magic that happens when kindred spirits unite.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Kindred Spirits Podcast. And please welcome our special guest today, Vanesa Cotlar. Vanesa is the Vice President of People and Culture at PolicyMe, and she was just named as one of Culture Amp's top 25 emerging culture creators for 2024. She is an advocate for flexible work environments, transparency, and ongoing feedback in the workplace. I wanted to bring her on here to pick her brain about building a strong company culture within a remote work environment. The episode is full of really good advice for entrepreneurs, managers, and HR professionals. Really, anyone could benefit from what she's learned through building that culture at PolicyMe. So, hope you enjoy the episode. Let us know if you have any feedback. We'd love to hear from you. Hi, Vanesa. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Maddie.
Absolutely. It's great to have you here. So, I would love to start with your background. Can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what your early career journey was like?
Sure, that sounds great. I don't get to talk about where I grew up or the early journey as much anymore, so I love that question. I actually was born in Argentina, and we moved to Canada with my family, with my mom and my stepdad when I was 9. So technically, Spanish is my first language. Funny enough, I'm actually in Argentina right now. I don't know if I told you this ahead
you
of today.
didn't. Wow.
Yeah, so I'm here working remotely, which I love that I get to do that. I've spent the holidays with my family. I've been here for about a month now. I was born in Argentina, went to Canada when I was 9, and was actually in Winnipeg, Manitoba, kind of in the center of Canada. Not everyone knows where it is. And I ended up moving out to Toronto after I finished school and lived there for a number of years. In terms of early career journey, I always say I grew up at Deloitte, which is like a funny thing. And people ask me, like, what do you mean you grew up at Deloitte? And I think there's this thing about your first job. And I think if you're there for a few years, it kind of really shapes you professionally, just how you think, how you approach work. And I noticed that kind of depending where people grew up professionally in those first few years, it really dictates a lot of how you are later on. And sometimes people can change a lot for sure, but a lot of the times, if that kind of works for you, there's methods that you adopt forever. So yeah, when I started out, I was a management consultant in the strategy space at Monitor Deloitte, which was the strategy group there at Deloitte. And I was based in Toronto, but doing a lot of work globally. I had opportunities to go to Bermuda, Johannesburg, London. So really very, very global projects as well. And spent quite a bit of time in New York. So definitely an interesting way to start career.
Yeah. Wow. So you have a seriously global background. You lived in multiple different countries and worked and traveled all over. And now you're able to actually work remotely while you're traveling in different places. That's such a huge benefit.
Yeah, I do genuinely love it.
So how did that then lead you to your current role on the leadership team at PolicyMe?
Yeah, there's quite a number of years in between, you know what I mean, of the whole kind of how you go from the first thing to where you are at.
Right.
So I think I'll tell you one of the things that I learned kind of earlier on that I think was a guidepost that kind of helped me foresee maybe a little bit of where I was going. I started in strategy consulting because I thought, I don't know, I was so young coming fresh out of school, and I thought, I want to really understand how businesses work. I think providing strategic guidance and support, understanding how executive teams think is just so interesting and important. And what I found, though, was the thing that I was most interested in the delivery of my work was like so who's now going to implement all these strategic recommendations? And what does it mean for the humans of a business? And there's a whole thing, which is human capital consulting. And for a number of years, I considered whether that's the space that I wanted to go into. But I ended up co-founding an HR tech startup after Deloitte and moved more into like the HR tech world. And then after that, I ended up doing a few different things in the HR tech space. and moving into, I guess you'd call them like more traditional people roles within tech companies. So before coming to PolicyMe, I was the director of people at another tech company. And then I joined the PolicyMe exec team almost 2.5 years ago now, which it feels like yesterday, but I mean,
Wow.
it's been a little while now. I remember like June, July of like 2021 when I was talking to them and making decisions. And yeah, it's been great. I mean, I think for me, I've always been very interested in the innovation side of things, but from a people side of things, which is, I think that people can be a company's biggest assets. They really are the ones that can deliver on those strategies. And it's like, how do you create environments where people feel empowered, where people like their jobs, where they want to show up every day and just like give it their all. So that's a little bit of insight into how I got to where I am today.
Yeah, okay. And that's really what I want to dig into is your thought leadership and expertise around creating a culture and environment where employees thrive. We've been connected for a little while before this interview, and I've been following you on LinkedIn and seeing quite a lot of the awesome posts that you share on there where you're sharing a lot of amazing advice for businesses to be able to help them have employees actually stay at the company and thrive. So I want to dig into that a little bit. With where we're at now, 2 years, 3 years post pandemic, there's a lot of remote work still going on. And I'd love to
Mhm.
know, what challenges have you seen in building culture in that remote environment, and how have you been able to overcome those?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think there were the challenges of, to your point, the pandemic remote. And now there's this like post-pandemic remote, which is like this steady state of just
Hmm.
how do you create cultures that work in this like new way of working. One of the things that I was talking to someone a while ago that I find super interesting is, um, and this, it's actually interesting because we used to talk about in management consulting. It's the idea that if you build for the edge case, it'll likely work for everyone else in the middle. There was this
Hmm.
example of like, you're trying to build scissors, but what if like you're building scissors for someone that doesn't have a hand? How are they going to use it? You know what I
Mm.
mean? So if you go to the more intense extreme of how do you build a product that then makes sense, and that's a pretty unique example. But I think when you think about building culture remotely, there's this thing of like, it's harder than it is in person. And I'm not
Yeah.
gonna lie, I think it is. I think there's something to be said for, when we think about challenges of being remote, there's you don't run into each other every day at the office. You don't
Yeah.
have the opportunity to have the casual moments or the conversations or where anyone has like that exciting news from the weekend. You want to come in and tell someone, maybe there's like not a natural, just like easy
Hmm.
opportunity to do those things. And I think that from a social aspect, like that easy socialization of, hey, want to go grab lunch, want to go grab coffee is kind of gone. And I think there's
Yeah.
this other element beyond the social connection, just around trust. And I think
Mm.
it's a super real thing of just like managers, leaders, executive teams being like, what are people doing every day? You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
are people working? And it's a very real fear that I think especially founders and entrepreneurs have, which is, you're building your company, you want people that are going to be committed. And when you can't ever see what they're doing, it's this feeling of like, well, are they doing the best thing for the organization? So
Mhm.
I think in my mind, there's like these bigger things of like social connection challenges of how do you build a place where people know each other, they're excited to show up every day when they don't really see each other much. And then how do you create an environment where people are actually trusted and deliver their best work when there isn't anyone around that's kind of helping them feel like that sense of pressure. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Mhm.
And not to say that you need that pressure to perform at your best, but it is different if like your manager is just like sitting over there and they can see you.
Yeah, that's interesting how you break it down that way with the social side and then the trust element. It kind of makes me think back to beginning of COVID when we were all remote for the very first time, and it was like memes of people like attaching their keyboard to their fan, like to keep the
Yes.
green dot online. It's
Yes.
like stuff
Yes.
like that. And definitely a fine balance between wanting to trust your colleagues or having trust with your manager, but then um, on one end of the spectrum, micromanaging, on the other end of the spectrum,
For sure.
employees just doing absolutely nothing all day long and getting
Yeah.
away with
I
it.
don't know if you saw there were these like mice that like you could leave it and it would like move by itself
Oh,
every little while too, which I thought was so funny.
people
But
think of everything.
yeah, people think of everything.
So yeah, since you have been dealing with this, so well, first, as a question before my real question, at PolicyMe, what is the policy around remote work? Is everyone allowed to be remote, or is it hybrid?
Yeah, so we have our employees are based in Canada, and basically we're remote first,
Okay.
which means, kind of you can work from home, you can work from a coffee shop. What we really say is, if you're going to be working anywhere else, it's important for you to look into, what is required to work in that place to make sure that it's okay to actually be there and all of those things. But
Mhm.
we are that like you choose where you work type of environment. We do have an office in downtown Toronto, and some people choose to go there regularly, right? Like some
Mhm.
people just prefer the office environment, and that's totally okay too. But what I say to everyone we hire is we have 3 mandatory days a year in office.
3
But
days, big
3 days.
ask.
Yeah, so but it's because we do get together as an entire company 3 days,
Oh, that's nice.
a year, and those really we're kinda getting into some of the ways that we've been able to address the social side of things, so maybe I'll just dive a little bit deeper
Yeah,
there. And
definitely, yeah.
yeah, I wanna make sure we don't forget to touch on more on that work side of things and the trust building, because I think that's super
Mhm.
important too. But on the social side of things, what we've done is we essentially organize like a full calendar year of how are we gonna connect.
Oh,
And
nice.
there's one thing that happens every month. So how we do it is we have 3 in-person events that are spread out throughout the year. We fly everyone in because we have employees all across Canada. So not everyone lives in Toronto or within the vicinity of the office. And we do a whole connection-based day. So that day is not focused on work. It's really like fun lunch together, fun activity in the afternoon. We do a
Wow.
big dinner at a venue, and it's just like our opportunity to like really engage with one another. And we all really look forward to those. We also, on top of those 3, we do 3 company-wide virtual events every year. So, for example, one of the pieces of feedback that we got as we were coming out of the pandemic was people don't like in-person holiday parties, right? They were
Mm.
like, we loved that we didn't have to figure out how to fit another holiday party in, given that we have all these family commitments and all these things
Right.
going on. So employee feedback was, of these 3 times that we get together during the year, can we just make sure that there's like nothing in December? So we're like, for sure. So
Smart.
we do this like really fun virtual holiday party, which we just did. We send employees like a fun gift box type thing to their
Aw.
home, and we do like a year in review, and we did like an employee trivia game. So we do all sorts of things to like make these actually engaging and fun. And we only do 3 of these a year that are
Mhm.
virtual company wide. And then each team has a budget to do their own event every other month. So basically, every month there's either a company wide event or a team specific event. And on the people side of things, on the people team, we support teams if they need help with those 6 that they're organizing. But
Mhm.
mostly they're self sufficient. Like someone on a team will be like, we should all read a book together this month. And they use their budget and they all buy a book. Or they want to do like a
Wow.
beer tasting at home. So they all get like beer delivered to their home. And on a Friday evening, they'll like do a fun session together. So
Oh, so fun.
like we really focus on curating those. And I always focus on like what's the best thing we can do at the best cost. I think it's just super important for these things to be budget conscious, especially
Mhm.
in the environment that we're in. And there's this other set of things that we do that kind of tie to that like social connection, but a little bit more into the work,
Mhm.
which we do a monthly town hall where our founders just do updates about the business, strategy, finance. I do a couple updates on, engagement survey and those sorts of things.
Mhm.
We do demos every other week. So showcasing work, it's for anyone in the company. It doesn't matter. Like you can be an intern and do a demo. It's just
Oh,
like to
cool.
talk about your work so people know what you're doing. And then we do shout outs on Slack. So anytime that someone does something cool, like we all get to see it. And then the last one we started last year that went over really well is an employee spotlight. So I think one of the things that's really hard when you're not seeing each other every day is like some people are really going above and beyond, and it can just be
Mm.
really contained within their small team.
Mhm.
So I talked to all the VPs and then their managers to figure out like who's doing a really awesome job and needs that like extra recognition for what they've been doing. So we also showcase those individuals at town hall. So maybe I'll pause there and then we can chat a little bit more about like trust on the other side.
Yeah, yeah. This is really, really cool to hear, and what strikes me is that it sounds like what you're doing at PolicyMe, you put so much more effort into making these connection moments than the average company does. So even if there's a company that you're working in office every single day, it's like you probably only end up talking to your same coworker friends, right? Or
Yeah.
you never actually all get together as a team even though you're seeing each other every day. Whereas with this remote culture, because you've taken the actual time and you've decided that you want to make this connection happen, you actually put so much more thought into it than probably a company would if they weren't in this remote environment, which ultimately makes it better for everyone. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and that's what I mean about like the edge cases, right? It's like when you
Hmm.
can reinvent it. I do think it's interesting because we used to do like a couple of years ago a Monday morning connect, and
Mm.
people didn't like it. They were like, "It's too much." They were like, "Okay, let's get rid of it." You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's just like I think the interesting thing is like not everything's going to work for every company, not everything's going to work forever, and it's just like iterating, trying different things, and seeing what sticks. And it's
Hmm.
really easy to tell by like, do people show up, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like we launched into Quebec um, this year, and we did like a virtual wine and cheese. So we gave everyone a budget like to go buy Quebec cheese and wines,
Nice.
and we brought in like a food expert from Quebec and talked us through it all. But so many people showed up in
Oh,
our company,
good.
right? And it's just like I think a good indicator of are the ideas and the different things.
Absolutely. Yeah. You can tell when people are engaged and stuff, or if they're just showing up because they have to be there. They don't really want to be there, or they would rather just be off of work, right? You can kind of
Yeah,
tell.
100%. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so I feel like maybe the trust building, actually getting your
Yes.
work done side might be a little bit more difficult. So let's hear what you guys have implemented for that.
Yeah, and I think those items that I was getting at there with like the town halls, the demos, shout outs, the
Hmm.
employee spotlights, those really help, especially the demos, because it's like an opportunity to showcase your work, right? So it's the saying that like if you've never done a demo, it's kind of like, what do you mean you've never done a demo, right? Like it's like everyone kind of has something to show at some point.
Yeah.
So it's this really cool way of knowing we all get to see a little bit of what everyone is up to. But I think it's just there's two things that come up for me, and one of them in particular, I'm running training for our entire company next year, which is upward management. And I think it's just for trust in a remote environment, you have to over communicate, right?
Hmm.
It's important for you to say to your manager, hey, these are the things that I'm working on. Are we aligned? Or is there anything else I should be prioritizing? Just to be open. And I think that the more that dialogue happens, the better people start working together. And, I have two people on my team now, and um, one of them, because of the nature of her work being, in people and culture, and she sometimes helps a little bit on recruitment. So her and I work very closely together every
Hmm.
day. She's like, hey, these are the things that I'm going to be working on today. Is there anything that I'm missing or anything that like I should consider reprioritizing? And we just go through the exercise every morning. And it's kind of like a stand up, but we do it
Yeah.
async. And it works super well for us. And it's not this like, oh, Vanessa's going to monitor everything. It's a way for us to be aligned. And I think one of the things that's super important is for people to understand that in those moments, it's like you need to find what works for you and your manager, but like it needs to work for both of you. And it
Hmm.
needs to make the manager feel informed and the employee not feel micromanaged. And
Right.
if you're not there yet, you have to continue iterating to see, okay, what is your practice that makes you feel
Hmm.
okay with those things? Because then managers need to kind of communicate up to their VPs or their leaders or whatever with their information on their direct reports as well. So I find
Hmm.
um, managing upwards is super, super important and a skill that's super worth learning. And the other piece too, this is an interesting one that came up a lot this year, is sometimes I think in a remote environment, it can be easy to just send a Slack message. We use Slack
Hmm.
internally, some other companies use Teams, and to just say, hey, this XYZ is happening or whatever that looks like. But one of the things that I've tried really, really hard to coach managers on is to remember that if we were in person, this would be a quick chat. So if
Yeah.
it's gonna be a quick chat in person, it should be a quick chat remotely. And I am very big on phone calls. It's rare that I say we need video for this meeting unless we have an agenda that we're sharing or we're like doing a bit more of a working session or a presentation. If we're
Hmm.
just having a conversation, I'm all about, can I give you a quick call?
Hmm.
And I've tried to get managers to kind of implement that with their teams too, to just send a Slack message and say, hey, do you have 5 minutes? I wanted to talk about X, Y, Z. And
Hmm.
it makes a huge difference because you get more in that cadence of just talking. And especially for people that are more junior and maybe they don't talk to that many people during the day, it can be nice to have a couple like quick 5 minute chats here or there that more so resemble that environment where you'd be around other people.
Yeah.
So I think those are a couple ways that, from a direct report perspective, learning to upward manage. If you're
Hmm.
feeling micromanaged, explore with your manager why. What are they missing? What do they need? Or if you're a manager and you don't feel informed, what's going on there in that relationship? And then that second piece of like, how are you actually communicating important information to each other? And how would you do it if you could be sitting next to each other? Would you send a
Mm-hmm.
message or would you actually talk? And I try to get people to really, really think about those moments.
I really like that, especially the phone call thing. Um, I've had a lot of different work experiences. I've worked at a lot of companies throughout my career. And my current role that I've been at for the past 2 years, I'm in real estate and property management. And this company is a little bit old school. Like they don't use any type of like Slack or Teams or anything, but everyone calls each other. And when I first joined, I was just coming from a software like startup where it was all Slack and it was like you never would just call somebody. Like that was a bit
Yeah.
weird. It was like you had to put time in the calendar and then you would jump on a video.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it was. And then I started this job and I was trying to get the hang of like, okay, so how am I supposed to reach out to this person? Like, do I text them? And my boss was like, yeah, just call. Yeah, just give him a call whenever. And like that was foreign to me, but
Yeah.
now I'm so used to it. And all day long, you would just get random phone calls, and that's absolutely fine. And if you can't answer, obviously you can't answer. You call them back, but
You
it
call them
feels a
back.
little old
Yeah.
school. But I kind of like it at the same time, because you're right. A lot more stuff actually needs to be said and not just texted.
And it's easier to get a sense of like, how do people feel about the change? Do they have any questions? Sometimes when you read something, you don't process it as well. So I really try to get people to think about like, what are the moments?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, how many employees is PolicyMe currently, roughly?
So I always say about, just because ebbs and flows, we're always hiring, but we're about 65.
65. Okay, so still on the smaller side, mid smaller side. I'm
Yeah.
curious for smaller companies or even newer entrepreneurs who are just starting to grow their teams. Is there anything that you would recommend for somebody who's wanting to build that positive culture right from the ground up in a business?
Yeah, I love that you sent me this one in advance because I had some time to think about it. And I remember, um, I think I said to you at the beginning, I co-founded an HR tech startup and we were
Mm-hmm.
tiny, right? Like those beginnings, and we never made it to be a bigger company or anything. But when you're just starting out thinking about like, what do you want your company to look like? I
Mm-hmm.
think one of the things that I truly believe is like the founders are the ones that end up dictating what the culture at an organization is going to be. Employees take it and run with it, but the founders have to set that direction and guidance for what they want. And I think when there's this feeling of like the people and culture team is responsible for that. That is not the case. The people and culture team is responsible for making that vision come to life.
Mm.
We will work with you to make that real, but we
Yeah.
need to know what you want. Because if not, what happens is like, I can build the culture that I want, but it may not be what the founder of the company wants. So I always say it's important as a founder to be clear on what you want your company to look like.
Mm-hmm.
And this is going to sound a little bit cheesy, but I thought I would share it with you anyways, because it kind of works for me. So what I always say is like, imagine like you're in the first couple of months, you're just starting out your company. It seems like it has promise. You've done some testing. There's market validation happening. There's some product market fit happening. You're feeling like, okay, we might have something here. You're like 2 co-founders, maybe 3. You're going to hire your first employee. This thing is like,
Mm-hmm.
it's starting to take off, right? And you're like, okay, this could be a real thing. And I think when you're in that moment, what is super important is like, close your eyes and think, okay, what do I want this to feel like if we're 100 people? And what I mean by that is like, what do you want the day-to-day to look like? How do you want people to feel at work every day? What types of humans do you want to be surrounded by? And I think if you just start to think ahead of like, if we do get to that size, this is what I want the day-to-day to feel like. That can help you work backwards and think about, what are the things that matter to me? What values do I want to instill in my company? And how do I share those and communicate those in a way that then is going to lead to the actions that are aligned to those values? I think one of the things that's hard is when you don't think about those things at the beginning, it's really hard to make decisions, not just for your people, but as a business, right? Some organizations are like very client first, right? So what that means is like, if you're a product-based company and you're like actually selling a thing, if a customer complains, like they're always going to be right. You're always going to have to find a solution, or like you're going to give them the thing for free. Like, what does that look like? What philosophy do you want in the day-to-day of the business? Because it's very different than a company that says, you know what, we believe our product is the best. We're a product-led company. So we actually don't think they're going to be right every single time. And we
Mhm.
want to really understand those issues and like explore them further, right? So I think it's good to think about, what does that future look like? How do you want your employees to behave in those situations, and create those values early. You can tweak them for sure a little bit over time, but I have spoken with a few founders that it's like, I think if your company is like 30-ish people and you don't have values at all, or people are a
Mm.
bit confused as to like, what is our culture, what is expected here, what is good, what is bad, that's where it can have these weird like pockets. So there's
Mhm.
like team specific culture but no company culture that's aligned.
Yeah.
And then where that becomes all problematic is it becomes a bit isolated, because a manager over here hires this type of human, a manager over here hires this type of human. And when those humans go to work together, they don't feel like they're a part of the same organization, because those
Mm.
teams work so differently. So, anyways,
Mhm.
they may seem like a bit of extra work at the onset, but I think for any company that has at least two people, so like two founders, the two of them getting aligned on what they want early on is super, super important.
Mm. I think that's great advice. Even more generally, like, it's great life philosophy of the idea of starting from the end and working backwards, and I think that could be applied to even so much more than just building culture, but yeah, that sounds like an awesome strategy, and I'm sure a lot of people probably skip that step of choosing those values, because that can seem a bit like, "Oh, we're not doing any actual work. We're, choosing values." It can seem fluffy maybe,
Yeah.
but, then like you said, when you get to that stage where it's a little bit too late and the culture's already formed without you even meaning to, then you're probably gonna lose so much time trying to make up for it. So, I think that's
And
awesome
then the worst
advice.
part is you can find people in your company that are just not aligned, right? And then
Mm,
it's like those tough conversations of like, how do you realign people to how you want them to operate? Or did you just hire a bunch of the wrong people, which is an even harder discussion to be having as well.
mhm, mhm. Okay, well, this has been awesome. I feel like we've gotten a lot of really great points here about how to build a great company culture, from the experts. So thank you so much for sharing all that
Of
with
course,
us.
anytime.
I want to ask one more question, and that is kind of related to our values as a podcast. And so, as you know, we're called the Kindred Spirits Podcast, and we just love connecting with people and aligning. We just have these conversations with people that we find to be on our same wavelength and learn from each other. So, one of our favorite quotes, actually, that inspired the name of the podcast says, "To discover a kindred spirit is to find your heart in the heart of a friend." And so I wanted to ask you, Vanessa, how do you know when you've found a kindred spirit?
Good question. I think it's interesting because my mind immediately goes like friend versus work. You know what I mean? Like, what are the
Hmm.
differences that I look for? But I think there's some similarities in both, just around the way of being. I think like I'm
Yeah.
personally a very open person. I like to be around people that are also open. I like to feel like it's an environment where I can share, the other person can share, and
Hmm.
that makes me feel like, okay, we're on that same wavelength. I
Yeah.
think that for me, the biggest thing really is communication. And it's when I meet someone, do I think I can communicate well with them? Do I think they're communicating well with me? And well means, does it feel like we're trusting each other?
Hmm.
Does it feel like we're sharing what we mean to, right? And I think it's like finding those moments of what feels like that genuine connection through
Yeah.
that communication. Um, yeah, I think is what does it for me.
Yeah. Well, I haven't asked this question in a work environment as much. I haven't thought of it that way, but it just makes me think that when I'm working with people where I actually feel like I can truly be myself, like my whole real
Yeah.
self at work, that is such a wonderful experience because there's a lot of roles that I've been in, I felt like I've had to sort of mask myself, be my work
Yeah.
version, not my real version. And so when you do find those colleagues and those people that you can be yourself with at work, that's such a great feeling.
Yeah, and I also think like on that point, I think I can be a bit of like a, I don't know how to phrase this, but more like a funny person in a certain way. You know what I mean? Like I laugh a lot. I find things funny. Like I can
Hmm.
be a little bit more, mm, I guess, like lighthearted. And I
Yeah.
think for me personally, that's important too. I think there's some humans that can take things a bit too seriously.
Mhm.
And don't get me wrong, sometimes in my field in HR, there's things that are very serious, and those moments are not the moments that are lighthearted for me. But
Mhm.
in the day to day, I think there's just this I think we have a kid inside all of us, and I think the
Yeah.
people that are okay with that and just embrace it are those that I tend to find that connection with too.
Yeah. I'm sure that really comes out when going through the hiring process and going through the process of describing what the company culture is, and you kind of attract those sort of like-minded people that are going to be the right fit for the culture. So kind of all is intertwined.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, last thing, where can people connect with you or follow you if they'd like to learn more?
Yeah, I always say LinkedIn. It's where I am the most. I posted every day of 2023. That was a work day.
Wow.
I know it was my goal for the year. I have 2 more days, Thursday and Friday, and then it'll
Nice.
have been every day that I work. I don't post when I'm on holidays. I just, I like
Yeah.
to properly take
Good.
vacation. But yeah, so that's a good place to find me. I'm gonna try to do the same thing in 2024. So hopefully there will be some listeners that find a way to connect there.
Awesome. Well, we will share your LinkedIn link in the show notes so everyone can access you there. But thank you so much for coming on and sharing all your knowledge. This has been really fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.